Today, I'll break down the trailer for L'heure de la sortie so that you can pick up some nuances of the French language as well as some new words and expressions as well.
Je vais remplacer Monsieur Capalis pendant quelques semaines. Vous êtes tous cinglés ici.
Manutentionnaire, hôtesse de caisse, femme de chambre.
By the way, the tool that I'm using throughout this video is called FluentU, and there's a link to a free trial in the description. It's full of interactive tools, video dictionaries, flashcards, and it's perfect to help you along your language learning journey.
Je vais remplacer Monsieur Capalis pendant quelques semaines. Je vais remplacer Monsieur Capalis pendant quelques semaines.
The part of the sentence that was quite jumbled was je vais, so you can use context clues like the word afterwards, remplacer, to figure out what's going on. Futur proche is the only verb tense that uses infinitive in the conjugated part of the verb, and since we see a single person speaking, we can assume that it's the je form, so je vais remplacer. In this first sentence, pendant is used as we would use the English for. You might be tempted to use pour in this situation, so let's look up what the difference is. As we can see, pendant means during a certain period of time or for a certain period of time, while pour is more intended for things and people. We can see that pour serves more functions than pendant does, and pendant is used solely in the cases of time.
Alors je vous demanderai de l'accueillir avec bienveillance et gentillesse, comme vous savez le faire. Alors je vous demanderai de l'accueillir avec bienveillance et gentillesse, comme vous savez le faire.
In this sentence, l'apostrophe is referring to le nouveau prof. Since he is the direct object of the sentence or the direct receiver of the treatment that the lady is referring to, she uses the pronoun le. Since the next word, accueillir, begins with a vowel, this le is turned into l'apostrophe. You might be tempted to use lui in this sentence because it's referring to a person, and le and la seem more associated with inanimate objects. But just be careful that in the case of pronouns, le and la are also referring to people. Bienveillance et gentillesse might be quite easy to figure out based on their stems, bien and gentil. And just like in English, in French you can add a number of suffixes to stems to change their function or part of speech. This is a great way to build your vocabulary without actually learning new words. Other examples of this are poli can become politesse, or triste can become tristesse. Every language has their own little filler expressions, and un is a common one that you would hear in French. You can even give it a click and hear some example sentences and get a better sense of its usage.
Un, j'ai rien compris. Un, tu peux répéter?
Again, we see the pronoun le used in this case, and it's replacing more of an abstract idea or an object. In this case, the le represents the imaginary it in you know how to do it.
Les élèves de la 3e 1 ont obtenu la meilleure moyenne de l'académie ces 4 dernières années. Les élèves de la 3e 1 ont obtenu la meilleure moyenne de l'académie ces 4 dernières années.
Here's where you could get possibly confused. 3e 1 could mean a classroom number or a zip code, or if you didn't have the direct translation, you might think they're saying un instead of un. And there's a number of possibilities for what this number could be. In cases like this, I like to omit the part of the sentence that I don't understand and then repeat the sentence to see if it makes more sense. So now we get les élèves ont obtenu la meilleure moyenne de l'académie ces 4 dernières années. Whether you understand that completely or not, that seems a little less fuzzy than what we had before. This is where la langue française gets a little bit tricky. Moyen and moyenne are both separate nouns that have separate definitions, but they are also adjectives, in which case they are just masculine and feminine versions of the same word. Starting with moyen. Un moyen est une façon d'accomplir quelque chose, so it's a means or a method of doing something. Contrarily, une moyenne is the average and is often used in context of school, like to say the average grade or score. Judging by this definition, it's pretty obvious that this is the word that's being used in the trailer. Moving on to the adjective forms, moyen et moyenne are also adjectives to describe anything that's basically medium or in the middle. So in that case, they are vaguely related to la moyenne, but they're still different parts of speech. Something I always used to be confused about is when to use un an versus une année, and the same thing goes for un matin versus une matinée, une soirée, un soir, un jour, une journée. While this is something that you might get more used to once you watch more French media, there's also quite a simple explanation for this. The masculine forms of these words, or the shorter ones, are used for more inspecific expressions. So for example, if you want to say every morning I eat breakfast, you would say le matin, je mange le petit déjeuner. Contrarily, if you're referring to more specific expressions of time, you would use the feminine form. For example, you could say j'ai passé toute la matinée à étudier le français, meaning you spent presumably all of this morning studying French. In the trailer, they're specifying ces 4 dernières années, pas n'importe quelle année. So they say année au lieu de an.
Quel âge est-ce que vous avez?
J'ai 40 ans.
Quel âge est-ce que vous avez?
J'ai 40 ans.
Remember, en français, when we talk about age, il faut utiliser avoir. J'ai 40 ans, not je suis 40 ans.
Mais du coup, pourquoi est-ce que vous êtes encore suppléant?
In English, you might have chanted encore during a performance to express that you want to see it one more time. And in French, encore does indeed mean once again or again. However, encore can also mean still, as in still doing something, still was somewhere, still felt some way. And that's why the student says, pourquoi vous êtes encore suppléant? To ask why the person is still a substitute teacher. Notice that he also doesn't say encore un suppléant. In French, when we talk about les professions ou les métiers, we don't use articles. So it's simply je suis médecin, elles sont musiciennes, il est artiste.
Je vous demanderai d'être particulièrement attentif à leur cas.
Je vous demanderai is le conditionnel, or the conditional form of demander. And even though in English the you in I would ask you comes after the verb, in French, if the verb is addressing someone, the pronoun goes in between the subject and the conjugated verb. Let's say you want to tell your friend you're calling them. You would say je te téléphone, not je téléphone te, or à toi. The same goes for past tense. Je t'ai téléphoné. You would put the te before the conjugated part of avoir, not between avoir and le participe passé. Notice also that before être, there is a d apostrophe, standing for de. It may seem weird to you since we're often taught that être is to be. Why isn't it just je vous demanderai être? I would ask you to be. This is where English and French grammar doesn't really translate directly. If we hover over this d apostrophe, we can see that it says introduces an infinitive, which is different from the word's typical meaning of or belonging to. The same goes for any other infinitive. Je vais essayer de ranger la chambre aujourd'hui.
Regarde ce qu'ils ont répondu à la question 8.
Ce qu'il is a compound phrase that can get tricky to know how to use. You may be tempted to instead say, regarde quoi ils ont répondu. But quoi is used more in the cases of questions, like c'est quoi ça, or elles ont dit quoi hier. The French language is all about flow, so if this little phrase doesn't make sense to you, think of it more as a filler to join phrases together, rather than something that has a direct translation that you need to understand. In French, there are very few cases of introducing a noun without having any mention of an article. Although in English you would just say question 8, in French you have to say à la question 8.
Quel métier voudriez-vous exercer?
Voudriez-vous is another example of le conditionnel, and here we see it being used with l'inversion, the method of creating a question by inversing the subject and the conjugated part of the verb. Now let's say you wanted to further understand the context that exercer is used in. You could simply click on the word for some example sentences, video clips using the word, as well as just the pronunciation of the word.
Manutentionnaire, hôtesse de caisse, femme de chambre, professeur suppléant. Tiens, ça c'est pour toi, c'est dans ta gueule. Manutentionnaire, hôtesse de caisse, femme de chambre, professeur suppléant. Tiens, ça c'est pour toi, c'est dans ta gueule.
Continuing on, here are some professions that you may be interested in the French words for. Then this person says tiens, which is used as an intention grabber and can also be used in the case of giving someone something to alert them that you're handing them something. In this case, tiens is used to differentiate what he was saying before and the next sentence that the actor is about to say. Here, the expression c'est dans ta gueule is used to mean serves you right. But in this case, we need a little bit more context from the film to understand the relation between le suppléant et ses élèves, to understand why exactly this serves him right. But that's what a trailer is for anyways, to pique our interest so that we actually watch the whole movie.
Allô?
While bonjour and salut are perfectly fine ways to greet people and are used by French people quite often, allô is also frequently used on the phone.
Il y a déjà eu des problèmes?
If you watched our previous video on learning French with comedy, you would know that ya is often used in place of il y a as a shortened form. Even though ya or il y a doesn't have much to do with the verb avoir, it is still the conjugated form of avoir, so it can be followed simply by the same participe passé, u. You might have heard the phrase déjà vu before, which means already seen. So you might think the sentence is asking, are there already problems? But judging by the ominous tone of this trailer and the comments and remarks that the students have made, it seems that if there are problems occurring, it's not the students' first time stirring them up. Déjà can also mean before, and its definition is a little bit different than avant. Avant is used in more declarative sentences, like elle est partie juste avant. But in this case, the question is asking, have there been problems before? So he uses déjà. Now remember how I told you we always use articles before nouns in French? If you are confused about when to use des versus les or de versus le, this is a good example. Since the teacher is asking, have there been any problems, he uses des because he's not referring to any specific problems. However, in the previous example, we said à la question 8 because he's referring to a specific question, question 8.
Ils ont toujours été très proches, très solidaires même. Ils ont toujours été très proches, très solidaires même.
Look at the sentence, ils ont toujours été très proches carefully. This time, toujours goes before le participe passé était, but after the conjugated part of the verb. In this case, proche has a similar definition to that of the English word close. It can describe both closeness in proximity or distance, and also describe relationships, like in this case. Notice at the end of the sentence, même is used as even, not the same. There's lots of French words with multiple meanings, and this is something that you'll just get used to over time.
C'est des ados, c'est tout, il faut que tu comprennes ça. C'est des ados, c'est tout, il faut que tu comprennes ça.
Les ados is short for les adolescents, and it's similar to how English speakers shorten teenagers to teens. It wouldn't be a French lesson without mention of the verb tense, le subjonctif, but why is the subjonctif used here? Il faut que is one of the most common phrases that introduces le subjonctif, and the easiest way to explain this tense is that it's used for situations that are hypothetical. In this case, it's necessary that the teacher understands that, but it's not certain that he will, so he uses le subjonctif.
Ils aiment bien tester leurs limites. Ils aiment bien tester leurs limites.
Aimer bien is a very popular compound used to show that you really like something, and it's a good way to distinguish between things that you just simply enjoy or like and some things that you really, really like.
Vous voulez vraiment qu'il se passe quelque chose dans votre vie? C'est pour combler un vide? Vous voulez vraiment qu'il se passe quelque chose dans votre vie? C'est pour combler un vide?
This little phrase, qu'il se passe quelque chose, is definitely a little confusing. One thing we know is that il is often used as a stand-in word and doesn't have much meaning, and quelque chose in this case is reconfirming for the listener that the il that they heard previously doesn't mean he, but is actually the stand-in word. Qu'il se passe quelque chose means something to happen, and you might be tempted to say quelque chose arrivé or quelque chose d'arrivé, but we can see that this isn't how we actually speak in French. Notice here that the girl says votre, which is the formal form of ta ou ton.
C'est pour combler un vide? C'est pour combler un vide?
And here we can learn another new word, combler, which is apparently used specifically to fill something that's figurative, in this case filling a void. If you wanted to fill something physical like a cup or a drawer, you would use remplir, but in this case, filling a void, we use combler.
C'est fini vos conneries là! C'est fini vos conneries là!
While English might use intonation and emphasis a lot to distinguish between the meanings of words and sentences, French doesn't rely so much on intonation, besides in these intonation questions. Instead, there's lots of little words like celui, ceci, cela that are used to distinguish and emphasize different words in a sentence. One example of this is the use of the word la in this sentence. In this case, if he just said c'est fini vos conneries, it would sound more like a simple question and be pretty calm and mellow. But his use of la at the end, c'est fini vos conneries là, turns the question into a rhetorical question and really emphasizes his aggression and anger with the students.
Vous voulez pas voir la vérité en face? Vous voulez pas voir la vérité en face?
In French, there's no verb for to face, so instead the translation becomes a little bit more literal, and you say en face and use the verb voir, so it kind of directly translates to look at the truth or the face of the truth.
Vous êtes tous cinglés ici. Vous êtes tous cinglés ici.
Here's a fun word for crazy if you got tired of the word fou. Cinglé. Isn't that fun to say? Cinglé. Ooh, what a chilling bande-annonce. I really enjoyed it. If you liked this video, be sure to check out the free PDF linked below. It's full of more French ghost stories that'll give you a good thrill while building your French skills as well. And if you like this breakdown of l'heure de la sortie, check out our other videos where we break down comedy shows, podcasts, and movies.